Hey, thanks so much for joining me on Between the Two of Us, a mental health podcast. I'm your host, Jen Alley, a licensed professional counselor, wife, and mom. In this podcast, we will talk about modern day life as it relates to your mental health. Drawing on my professional experiences of being a therapist the last 14 years, my background in education, and my personal experiences, I want to help you feel less alone in your struggles while teaching you what I wish everyone knew about brain science and mental health. While this podcast isn't therapy, I will offer practical tools and strategies grounded in neuroscience to improve your relationships, life, and mental wellness. Thanks so much for listening. Grab your cup of coffee or your walking shoes and let's get started. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Between the Two of Us. This is your host, Jen Alley. And we are going to have a short but sweet episode today about something I've been thinking about. And that is about change and about choosing discomfort at times in order to grow or in order to change. So I first started thinking about this a couple of days ago. I was in a yoga class and I really like this instructor. I've been to his classes before, and usually it's a guided flow class. And so he guides you through the different vinyasa sequences. And I guess at this particular place, they have changed things up to where now, after the first couple of sets, you are going to lead yourself through at your own pace based on your memory, the vinyasa sequences. And I cannot remember sequences. So I feel like if there is a gene that has to do with like choreography, I am missing that gene. Like it was somehow missed in my creation. And so I intentionally kind of avoid classes like this because it feels kind of stressful for me. I already have a little bit of like a perfectionistic in recovery, like trying to do it right aura about me anyways. And then you combine that with this sort of sense that I like genuinely cannot remember sequences. And it's just like kind of stressful. And that's the opposite of the vibe I want during yoga class. And so as it became apparent to me that that's what was happening, I started to feel really uncomfortable and like I don't want to do this. I can't remember it. Like, what's the point of this? Like, I don't know. Just kind of like down a rabbit hole, right? Of like thoughts. But after my little flurry of icky thoughts, I then thought, well, I'm already here. So I'm just going to focus. I'm like going to do the best that I can. And I'm also going to kind of peek around the class to see what other people are doing. So I started to just work through the poses as best as I could remember them, and also taking in some cues from other people around me, and slowly started to be like, okay, like I do kind of remember the sequence and it's not so bad. And he talked about the end of the class, right, of that practice of like, for one, sort of engineering your own practice and being able to integrate things that feel good to your body. And also just about our minds. And, you know, I know with our memory and mindfulness, it's really good for us to practice this. So it made me feel really uncomfortable in the moment. But at the end of class, I was glad I stayed, and I actually kind of surprised myself with how much I could remember. And I realized that like, oh, this is actually a really great exercise for my mind because I don't have a great memory in that way. And it's something for me to practice and to work on. And it also made me think of something else that's been going on, which is that I started this podcast at the end of December. I spent a long time thinking about it and naming it and, you know, considering all the possibilities. And then I've been given feedback from someone who is really an expert and a coach that my podcast title is not SEO friendly. It's not search friendly. And that therefore the only people who will find it are people who probably already know me or who are telling someone else about it. And so they suggested rebranding it. And I don't know if you've ever like worked really hard on something and then someone tells you like, you got to start over, but it's just like kind of soul crushing, right? But like also there's genius in that because this person knows so much more about it than I do. And they had, a really good suggestion. And I think actually they're dead on. It's just that it's hard. It's uncomfortable. But also, if I want the podcast to grow, I need to work on rebranding it. So super uncomfortable. It's going to be a lot of work. I still got to figure it out. I don't even know what I'm going to rebrand it to. It's still going to be a same mental health podcast, you and me, but something that will hopefully be a little bit more search friendly, right? That will communicate more what it is about in the title. And so this just really has me thinking a lot about when we want change, when we want growth. And we're not always in a season of change and growth, right? Like sometimes it's just like, it's okay just to be like, I'm just like head down doing my thing. I'm just like getting by. Things are good. They're good enough. Of course, we have seasons like that. And also, when we want change, when we want growth in an area, it usually requires some discomfort. It requires some vulnerability. It requires some effort and some hard work. So I'm thinking, for example, about, even like marriages, right? If you want a better marriage, it takes work, right? Like it's kind of the easy button just to cohabit, as long as you don't have a super high conflict relationship. If you just kind of like cohabitate and like numb out on your phone and like don't really discuss the hard things and just kind of avoid the hard topics, like that's comfortable, but you're probably a little lonely, right? You're probably feeling kind of disconnected. Or maybe in this sort of middle part of your life, you feel disconnected from friendships. Like it's not like college where we all live together and hang out together all the time, right? And you're feeling a little lonely and like, just disconnected and feeling a little bit left out. And it's hard. It's hard to show up at the new thing. It's hard to show up at a class you've never been to, or at a sport, that you're picking back up after many years, or at a meetup group, or whatever that looks like for you. It's hard to be new. It's really uncomfortable. And I think the older we get, the more uncomfortable it is because we're not used to it. When we're little, we're thrown in new environments all the time. And as we get older, it's easier just to kind of go through the motions. We have our rhythms, we have our routines, but it's also really easy to get stagnant and to feel kind of like bleh about how things are going. Or maybe it's your job, maybe you're kind of like blah about your job. And again, but maybe it like pays the bills and you're like semi, it's okay. And so, again, it requires courage. It requires the discomfort of putting yourself out there, of potential rejections from new employers. Maybe you're getting back in the workplace after staying home with your kids, right? There's all these different situations that in order to get to where we want to go, it's really uncomfortable. Maybe today this sounds a little bit more like a pep talk or something, or a motivational speech, but it's just been on my mind that a lot of the clients who come to me, they want something to change. They want something to be different. And even the counseling process can be really uncomfortable to take a look at things that you don't really want to take a look at. But also to get to where you want to go, that can be really a necessary part of the process, right? And so Brené Brown says you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you cannot choose both at the same time. So if this touched you, spoke to you in some way, if this lights a fire under you, whatever the thing is, I would just encourage you to spend a little bit of time thinking about, journaling about, reflecting on what's working in my life and in what areas am I a little bit dissatisfied, and what's one step that I could take toward being more fulfilled, toward living more of the life that I want. I was listening to a podcast episode. It was an older episode. It was on the Rich Roll podcast with Jesse. I don't know if it's Itzler. I think it's Itzler. He's married to the woman who founded Spanx, Sarah Blakely. And something that Jesse was saying that really, was interesting to me, and it might feel a little morbid, but I actually think it's helpful in some ways for us to think about this, is he was saying that like the average lifespan is about 78 years old. And so if you sort of count backwards to whatever age you are, right, then that kind of, maybe hopefully you'll live a lot longer than that. But it's sort of like, okay, if that's how much time I have left, if I have that many summers left, if I have, that many Christmases left, if I have, even I think about my kids, the ages they are right now, they're 10 and they're 8. If I have 8 more years at home with one of them and 10 more years at home with the other one, it's like it puts it really into perspective pretty quickly. And I think when we can hold that, it's like, okay, and like some of those years like aren't going to be my best years physically, right? So it's sort of like, well, what are the things that are important to me to do physically? Because there's only so much time probably for that, right? I want to stay in the best shape I can in terms of like longevity, but so I guess I'm just, and even travel wise, right? Like probably when I'm 85, I won't be doing a ton of traveling. I mean, hopefully, maybe, but like probably not. And so I think this is just a little bit of a helpful perspective. Again, maybe seems a little bit morbid, but I think it helps us to really see our lives and to see our time in a different way when we don't think of it as kind of forever, but we just think about it in this very finite sort of way of like, what matters to me? Like, what are my priorities? What's going to bring me happiness? So again, kind of more of a motivational speech today than maybe therapeutic thoughts, but I think they're worthwhile things to be thinking about. So take a minute to journal, notice what you want to be different in your life. How do you want to feel? How do you want to live? How do you want to be? And like, what are the steps you need to take toward one of those? Pick one and focus on that. And so I hope you found something from today helpful. If you would be so kind as to share this podcast episode, I would be forever grateful. Also, if you feel so inclined, it would be great if you could leave a review if you have not done that yet. So you can follow me over at jenalley.com. I'm on Instagram at jen.alley.therapist. You can also shoot me an email at jen@jenalley.com. And I will look forward to seeing you here next week. Thanks so much for listening.